So anyway, you're working from home, I assume?
Yes, I've been working, so our office has been working remotely since the shutdown was announced. So that day, I think it was May 16th.
Yeah.
I go to the office probably like a couple times a week though, still just to work and check on things and access files and stuff that I don't have. But like once we got into week 2, I like went back in and got my big desktop and brought it home, and now have a totally like makeshift office situation. Although I just moved in Germantown as well, so the last 2 weeks have been a bit hectic.
Yeah, you've got a lot going on. Plus, you're getting up to speed on the executive directorship, so congratulations on that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but you've been doing that since February, so you're sort of, you had about a month before it shut down.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, I was acting director since February, and also I had been deputy director the year prior. So I was already like working like in a leadership role and with our late director, Andy Trackman, really closely. And so when he went out for medical reasons in, I think it was early September, I was the lead for a bit. And that just progressed. There were a bunch of things that we wanted to do. I mean, of course, at first we weren't sure if Andy was going to be able to come back. Everybody, of course, would have preferred that. And it's just that's been emotionally a tough year for the organization and our staff and our board, losing him. But also, it was part of the evaluation that you mentioned, that we wanted to take that opportunity to step back, look at where the organization was at, look at what the needs of the community are, and just do an internal assessment before making any decisions about the director role and like how the organization wanted to proceed. So.
Yeah. And you hit all those boxes because you've been doing it already. You had the experience, so you were you hit the ground running, is what it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. How is it working remotely? Does that present any particular challenges? I mean, are you guys okay with Zoom and doing virtual things?
Well, it's interesting. I'm like zoomed out in a way. But most of the Zoom things that I end up participating in on a day-to-day are like city trainings or meetings with our peer organizations, because this is such an unusual time for many reasons in our lives in cities and working in commercial districts throughout the city, that folks have really come together through organizations like the Philadelphia Association for Community Development Corporations and the Commerce Department. There's also the Northwest Commercial Corridors Collaborative. Everyone's been hosting weekly check-ins, and those have been really valuable. Now, when it comes to like constituent services and working with the local business community, we're doing much of that stuff via phone.
Okay.
Yeah, and like we always offer video, but phone just tends to be like more people's go-to and more comfortable. And frankly, I like it too, because what's so annoying about all of the video things is like when you see someone suddenly like, and it's frozen but they can't tell it's frozen, so they're still talking, and then you spend all this time back and forth getting all caught up.
Yeah, we've had an interview or two where it's been like, and then it's like we just have to put up a message saying, sorry, technical difficulties, because you can only rely on the connection to get you through. You can't do much else. Luckily, we record all this, I think I mentioned to you, so that we can do a lot of splicing and editing at the end to make it look a little less egregious. But yeah, there are those really tough hiccups.
But, I mean, it's happening at every level, the hiccups. So like no one should feel bad about it.
No, and it's funny because
sometimes I find it can sometimes slow things down.
It's true. It's true. And it's an interesting point I read somewhere that with all the people home from their office buildings, you're losing. I mean, everyone now is jumping on the home the home networks, whereas before you had these giant corporate hubs that could handle a lot of this traffic. So maybe as we get closer and deeper into the yellow, we'll, the home access will open up a little bit. But
Yeah,
anyway.
I had a really hard time actually at my old apartment. Like I frequently would have to do the phone only just because I kept getting dropped and things being frozen. And I think it was because we were on the same network, and everyone in the building was using the same network. Whereas this new place, we have our own.
You got it right. Yeah, good. So yeah, well, thanks for making time. I appreciate it. I know you're busy.
You want to start at the top?
Yeah. So what is it when you talk to people in the neighborhood or even in some of your partner organizations, but I guess more we can focus on the local businesses because I think that's what people would most like to know about. But what do most people think GUCDC does? Do you get like a certain type of response from people or a range of responses?
Yeah. So it's interesting because from the local business community, because there have been a lot of other organizations in Germantown, sometimes simultaneously, that are also serving the local business community, which is great. We need all the resources that we can get here. That there is confusion about who does what. So there's that. So there's the constant having to define who you are and what you do. And I would say that with like the greater Germantown community, I think because we started out focused on small businesses and advocating for and bringing more resources to the commercial corridors, that's all we do. And it was all we did for a number of years. Right. So we were mainly only interacting with residents who were small business owners, or around like the larger zoning and planning matters. And in addition to like being a support to Germantown's many volunteer civic groups and registered community organizations where we could. Right. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago that the organization expanded its mission to deepen the connection to the residential community and better serve Germantown residents. So that's an area of focus that we're still working to make people more aware of.
Okay, so you broadened it a little bit from just the business focus to include more of the civic engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and some of that is, so that shift was something when we, as an organization, again, we looked inward and did a 5-year strategic plan, and that was one of the goals because there was a definite need there. But we were also kind of looking at, in some ways, how we've been, I shouldn't say how we've been stalled, but some of the challenges that Germantown is facing in terms of revitalization of these commercial nodes. And a big part of that is vacant properties. And because Philadelphia is changing because of this so-called real estate boom that hasn't quite trickled down everywhere, we have a lot of really large absentee property owners in Germantown that are just sitting on properties, not keeping them occupied, even with businesses at all, so getting total tax write-offs for them. And that's really kind of like choking us in a bit of ways.
Right.
And so, there's only so much you can do in situations like that. Yeah. So the turn, of course, was to prioritize focusing more on the small business community as well.
Okay. And is in that plan that you mentioned, I know from our perspective as a news organization, and as you hear from the Germantown Info Hub, there's always this digital engagement versus on the ground sort of personal engagement. Do you have, how do you straddle those two lines? Because obviously digital access in Germantown is not a given for everyone.
Right, totally. I would say, we do a lot on the phone, especially on the residential side. So people get our number and they call because they're being referred to us by either another resident or another organization. So there's a fair amount of word of mouth, but also to make other support organizations know that we exist, we're building our relationships and partnerships partnerships with organizations in Germantown. So like myself or my colleague Rakim, regularly reaching out to and meeting with various organizations in Germantown to say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we do, what do you do? And we're like really strengthening collaboration in that way. And so there's that. In addition, for one part of our work with the residential community, that it happens under a program that we're part of called the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, is mortgage and foreclosure outreach. So my colleague Rakim Miller, he gets lists every week of, it includes exact addresses of properties that are being foreclosed on in the residential properties in the Germantown area, 19144 and 19138. And he does outreach like on the blocks. So he visits those houses directly to try to engage with residents and connect them with resources that may assist in mitigating those issues. So that's like a one-on-one thing. And then to expand, since we're going to those individual blocks, each block that has a targeted address will also get like flyered, every property on the block. So that's another like way of like, I mean, it's slow, but you can see it picking up in the last year that we've had this program, like the volume of calls and the volume of walk-ins that we get.
And I would guess with COVID, that's been accelerated. I would assume he's got a full plate right now.
Yes.
Yeah. And that applies both to residential and business, I would assume, right? I mean, that's really put a dent in everything there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing too with the local business community. Like Germantown doesn't have a independent business association, for example. I wouldn't say that the business community isn't unified. I think that folks are in their own pockets. Like in general, when I talk with a business owner, they know all the owners on their block and they've got a little email list, but they're not necessarily organizing beyond that. But the best way to engage with business owners is like next to their cash register in their store.
And like you say, it can be slow, but it's probably the most effective way, because you get that face-to-face engagement or on the phone engagement, which is a lot more personal than just let me shoot a blast email to you or something.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like our newsletter, so we have a monthly newsletter, and we've been trying to do them more frequently than every month, depending on what's going on. And we also have a website, and we've got our Facebook, and we participate in like Germantown's more robust Facebook groups. And I'd say that like we get a lot of traction through Facebook, but there's still not the constituents necessarily that we're working with on the day-to-day. It's like another population. And, you know, I mean, it's all good, but it's just interesting.
Yeah. So just to take a step back then, how many years have you been with the CDC?
So I joined Germantown United in 2015. And at that time, it's funny, I was actually the only full-time employee when I joined, because Andrew Trackman was the executive director, but he was only part-time. And that changed, I think, after like 6 months to a year. But I've been with, the organization, I think it was in August of 2015.
And what prompted it? What had you show up at the door of GUCDC? the backstory on that, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, sure. So I've had like 2 careers. So for post-college, my first career was in marketing and public relations for nonprofit organizations and arts and cultural organizations in the city. So I worked at a really small firm that worked with organizations like the Live Arts Festival and Philly Fringe and Philadelphia Young Poets and the Wilma Theater, Rosenbach Museum and Library. Like those are the types of projects that I worked on and clients that I worked with. And as I grew there, my interest in community work started to grow. After college, I moved back to Germantown, to my childhood house, which is on West Rockland Street, 19144. My sister still living there. And I got a job in Mount Airy, and I was like, can I live here too? This is really close. And I just lived there like any other person in the neighborhood, not really, I wasn't involved necessarily. I just really liked Germantown, and I was living here. And after the 2009 foreclosure crisis, our block that I have really a deep ties to because I grew up there, really just we just saw changes. I think we had definitely over 7 longtime homeowners that we knew as children. The houses had been in the family for a long time, just like ours, lost their houses to foreclosure, and they were snapped up by real estate investors, and some of them were flipped. Some of them remained just vacant and became abandoned. And they've been changing ever since. And longtime community members and even newer members, we were experiencing quality of life shifts. And so folks started organizing. And that really got me interested more in community organizing. And so I shifted professionally the type of projects I was working on, which I was able to do at the organization I worked with. So I then started doing the marketing and PR for organizations like Design Philadelphia, and PAFA, when they were getting a new park where that paintbrush is installed. We handled that launch. And after I left, I worked independently for Mural Arts Program and Next City, and Design Philadelphia again as well, kind of deepening the type of programs that I was working on. And then this job popped up.
That's great.
And, and it was just it's time to just totally try something different. Although I will say that personally, I don't really see it as a huge leap, because I think that all of this type of work the core is about communications and the stories we tell and how we can adapt. And working with a contemporary dancer and trying to figure out how to explain what it is that they do to a greater public, versus translating a community need to a political representative and way high up. It's the same.
Yeah, it's about the message, and you need to have a good message that can get through to them. Yeah, that's interesting that you also saw that actually on your street, so that really engaged you. You could look out your front window and see this is the effect of this sort of thing, and there's the need then to get involved in a larger sense in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you most proud of in the 5 years you've been there?
This is so any kind of top 10 lists or favorites or whatever, I have a terrible time with. So I'm not going to call this the thing that I'm most proud of, but it's just one thing. And I would say it was the start of our neighborhood advisory committee program. So let's see, I'm trying to think of the story of this. I guess I should define it a little bit. So the city's neighborhood advisory committee program it's under the Philadelphia Division of Housing and Community Development. And neighborhood advisory committees, most people know them as NACs. And they're all around the city, typically in low and moderate income neighborhoods. And you have to have certain demographics to qualify to even be able to apply to have a NAC in your community. But why they're important is that they help residents in those neighborhoods like ours learn about programs that are available that they could benefit from, and they enable organizations like ours to be able to hire a full-time staff member to do this type of work, where like they're doing extensive outreach and community engagement face-to-face, not just online, to better serve our neighborhood. And, you know, it is the NAC program, any kind of city contract, I will tell you, it's like, it's about this thick when you turn it back in. So there are barriers to entry, right? And this was one of the things that like, I know Andy was really proud of too, is we had to get ourselves ready to even be eligible to be able to apply, getting all our ducks in a row as an organization. Like I can tell you one of the things is, one of the criteria is like what you get from the NAC program has to be like less than some percentage of your overall budget. So that like an organization who was mainly just gonna run a NAC program wouldn't qualify. I mean, so like it's complicated. They don't want it to be like the only source of income, which I understand because they're wanting to invest in long-term solutions, but it's hard. And so we finally got everything together and we were able to apply in 2018 and we were awarded the contract then. And then the following year we were able to hire Rakeem Miller, who I know you've spoken with before. And he's like hit the ground running with the program. So, I mean, the types of things I should explain also, for folks not familiar, like that it helps people with are the things I mentioned before, like the mortgage and real estate, tax foreclosure, home repair programs, tax relief programs, housing issues. I mean, if you look at what the city offers, it's like it's a ton of stuff, but every application is different. Every application is it's not streamlined. And so being able to provide people with assistance in just completing them and walking them through them, in addition to letting them know of their existence, has been like really rewarding. I think that that's good. And
it keeps the neighborhood, keeps those houses, those generational houses in place, and keeps that sense of neighborhood still there through the people and the families that are able to still live in the neighborhood.
Right, exactly. And one of the things that was like kind of like distressing was Germantown as a neighborhood met all the qualifications for being eligible for this program, but we didn't have a NAC for several years. I mean, there's been different iterations in the past, and organizations come and go, and they've done great work. But like the fact that that resource was available to us, but we couldn't take advantage of it for a couple of years was really difficult, like to know.
Yeah. No, it really is. I mean, you're right. There are probably a lot of things that you guys are doing because you are heading in lots of different directions with the community engagement, the business engagement. So I guess it would be hard to pick something good, but as far as something that really has a lasting effect and has an effect for people who really need it most, I think having NAC would be something to be very proud of.
Yeah.
So what else besides that? I guess that would be sort of into the next question about helping the neighborhood through the COVID thing, the protests, which, by the way, how were the protests? Have they had any effect particularly other than obviously the marching? We saw the marches in the streets, a couple of, I heard that Perfectly Flawless got a window smashed in and things like that. Has that really impacted your efforts lately?
I mean, yes, in that like there needed to be an immediate response and outreach. I should just backtrack slightly though to say that I mean, this is just a really difficult time for a lot of people, and really the Black community and Germantown's Black community after what happened with George Floyd in Minnesota. I mean, it doesn't at all surprise me that we're seeing this groundswell of activity and like demand for change happening across the country and the world. And in our city too. So I just want to acknowledge that what happened locally within business districts also happened throughout the city as well. And it's really a difficult situation, but we did have over a dozen businesses that suffered significant property damage. And so they're still navigating that. Some of them are not open.
Yeah.
And there was definitely a delay as we moved into the phase yellow. Last Friday, the corridor was still pretty like no man's land, as it has been for the most part during the pandemic. And actually, I was pleased to see this past Monday that a lot more doors were open. But you know, we've got some businesses that like had to board up their properties after the fact, that are keeping them up.
Yeah.
Like especially the pharmacies, the small pharmacies. And, you know, I was really impressed at how quickly actually the neighborhood pharmacies were able to reopen, whereas some of our larger corporate drugstores and pharmacies remained closed for many, many, many days. There was also difficulty in getting, finding certain business owners and property owners to get their buildings sealed. And like legally, you can't really go and seal someone else's building. I wanted to.
Right. And that's where that absentee landlord issue it comes into play.
Right.
Tracking down who owns that particular property and how to contact them.
Right. And I mean, the other complexity there too, though, is like we've got lots of great business owners who are not Germantown residents. So because of the shutdown, people are really just gone, and maybe periodically checking in on their building or their business. And so it goes beyond the absentee on that front, was finding people.
Yeah. And then I guess then how do you where can we go next on this question, on these questions? Hold on just
Let me actually, can I add something to that?
Please do. Yeah.
I